It was a crisp autumn morning, and I could feel the cold bite of the wind as it swept through the dense forest. The leaves crunched under my boots, their once vibrant colors fading into the decay of the season. I was out hunting, a ritual passed down through generations in my family, but this hunt was different. I had ventured deeper into the woods than ever before, driven by the promise of a trophy that would make this year's hunt legendary. The rumors about these woods had always been vague, a whisper here, a fleeting glance there, but they all had one thing in common, a warning. Old folks in the village would say, "The forest has eyes and it doesn't like to be watched." I dismissed their words as superstition, confident in my skills and my rifle. Little did I know, those whispers were the forest's way of telling me to stay away. As I moved deeper into the heart of the forest, a heavy fog began to roll in, swallowing the trees and muffling the sounds of the forest. It was eerily quiet. No birds, no rustling of leaves, just the sound of my own breathing. The silence was unnerving, but I pressed on, my senses heightened, searching for any sign of movement. That's when I saw it, a flash of brown against the green and grey. A large stag, its antlers massive and gnarled like the ancient roots of the trees, stood at the edge of the clearing. It was majestic, almost ethereal, and it would make the perfect trophy. I slowly raised my rifle, taking careful aim, when suddenly the air grew heavy, as if the forest itself was holding its breath. Just as I was about to pull the trigger, I heard it, a faint whisper, almost indistinguishable from the wind. My finger froze on the trigger as the whisper grew louder, more insistent. It was a voice, soft yet filled with a cold, unnatural malice. "Leave this place," it hissed, the words snaking through the trees and curling around my mind like a vice. I lowered my rifle, my heart pounding in my chest. My breath came in ragged gasps as I scanned the trees, searching for the source of the voice, but there was nothing. Just the trees, the fog, and the silence. Trying to shake off the fear that had crept into my bones, I turned back to the stag, but it was gone, vanished into the fog as if it had never been there. Frustration mixed with unease, and I cursed under my breath. But the whisper came again, louder this time, echoing in the stillness. "Leave. Now." The voice was unmistakable, and this time it was joined by others, a cacophony of voices all urging me to go, to run. But pride and curiosity got the better of me. I wasn't about to be scared off by some strange noises. I gripped my rifle tighter and continued forward, the whispers now a constant presence in the back of my mind. Each step I took felt heavier, as if the very ground was pulling me down deeper into the forest's grasp. The trees began to change around me, their trunks twisted and gnarled, their branches reaching out like skeletal fingers, trying to snatch me up. The fog grew thicker, wrapping around me like a shroud, making it hard to see more than a few feet ahead. And then I heard it. Footsteps. Not mine, but something else, something heavy and deliberate, following just out of sight. My heart raced as I spun around, trying to catch a glimpse of whatever was stalking me. But all I saw was the fog, swirling and shifting like a living thing. The footsteps grew closer, the sound of twigs snapping underfoot, the soft rustle of leaves. I raised my rifle, aiming into the mist, my hands trembling. "Who's there?" I called out, my voice cracking with fear. But there was no answer, only the whispers, now louder, more menacing. Suddenly, a shape loomed out of the fog, a figure tall and shadowy standing just beyond the reach of my rifle's sight. My breath caught in my throat as the figure slowly advanced, its features obscured by the fog. I backed away, my mind screaming at me to run, but my feet refused to move, Then, with a sickening realization, I understood. The figure wasn't a man. It wasn't anything human. It was a twisted, monstrous thing, its body contorted and unnatural, its eyes glowing with a cold, malevolent light. The whispers turned into a low, guttural growl, reverberating through the trees, shaking me to my core. I fired my rifle in a blind panic, the shot echoing through the forest, but the figure didn't flinch. It kept coming, relentless, unstoppable. I turned and ran, my heart pounding in my chest, the fog closing in around me, the whispers and growls chasing me, filling my mind with terror. The forest seemed to come alive as I fled. The trees twisted and writhed, their branches lashing out like whips trying to ensnare me. Roots erupted from the ground, tripping me, tearing at my clothes and skin. I could feel the figure's presence behind me, growing closer, its icy breath on the back of my neck. I stumbled and fell, the ground beneath me soft and wet, like a grave freshly dug. The whispers turned into screams, deafening, maddening, as the figure loomed over me, its twisted form blocking out the dim light filtering through the fog. I tried to crawl away, but it was no use. The figure reached down, its long, gnarled fingers wrapping around my ankle with a grip like iron. It dragged me through the forest, the ground tearing at my clothes and skin, the trees closing in, their branches forming a cage around us. I screamed, but the sound was swallowed by the fog, the whispers drowning out my voice. The figure stopped at the edge of a deep, dark pit, its depths shrouded in darkness. With a final, terrifying scream, it lifted me up and threw me into the pit. I fell for what felt like an eternity, the darkness swallowing me whole. The last thing I saw was the figure standing at the edge, its glowing eyes burning into my soul as the darkness closed in around me. When I awoke, I was lying on the forest floor, the fog gone, the forest silent once more. My rifle was gone, and my clothes were torn and bloodied. I stumbled to my feet, my body aching, my mind numb with terror. I didn't know how long I had been unconscious, but the sun was setting, casting long shadows through the trees. I staggered through the forest, my heart racing. The memory of the figure's glowing eyes burned into my mind. I finally made it back to the village, but I was a changed man. The whispers still haunted me, their voices echoing in my mind, telling me that I was never truly alone, that the forest would always be watching. And now, every time I close my eyes, I see that figure, waiting for me, calling me back to the whispering woods, where the darkness never sleeps, and the forest's secrets are buried deep within its twisted heart. Growing up in our small, remote village nestled in the shadow of the mountains, tales of the old hunter were as much a part of our lives as the biting cold of winter. He was a legend, a man who had once been the most skilled tracker and marksman in the region. But his fame had turned to infamy after he went mad, disappearing into the mountains, never to return. The elders would warn us, their voices heavy with fear. Never venture too far into the mountains, for that's where the old hunter roams, cursed and damned. For years I dismissed these stories as mere folklore, tales spun to keep us in line, to stop us from wandering too far. But as I grew older and my skills as a hunter improved, the mountains called to me. The rugged peaks, shrouded in mist, held a challenge that I couldn't resist. And so, one bitterly cold morning, I set out alone, determined to prove myself, to find the truth behind the legend. The ascent was brutal, the air thin and the wind howling like a beast. The path was treacherous, narrow and slippery with ice, but I pressed on, driven by pride and curiosity. As I climbed higher, the forest thickened, the trees twisted and ancient, their branches gnarled like the hands of old men. The deeper I went, the more the world seemed to close in around me, the silence heavy and oppressive. It was then that I found the cabin, Hidden deep within the woods, it was more ruin than shelter. The roof sagging, the walls blackened with age and rot. It stood as a testament to the passage of time, a relic of a man who had been lost to the wild. The door, hanging by a single hinge, creaked open as I approached, as if inviting me inside. I hesitated at the threshold, the stories of the old hunter echoing in my mind. But the lure of the unknown, the need to uncover the truth, pushed me forward. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of decay, a sickly sweet odor that clung to my skin. The room was small, barely furnished, with a crude wooden table and a bed made of straw. But it was the walls that caught my attention. They were covered in strange symbols, carved deep into the wood, their meaning lost to time. They seemed to pulse with a dark energy, and as I reached out to touch one, a shiver ran down my spine. I pulled back, suddenly aware of how quiet it had become. The wind had died, the forest outside still and silent. The air felt heavy, almost suffocating, as if the cabin itself was alive, watching, waiting. I turned to leave, but something stopped me. A noise, faint and distant, barely audible. It was a voice, low and raspy, like the sound of dry leaves scraping across the ground. "You shouldn't be here." I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. The voice was coming from outside, but when I looked through the grimy window, I saw nothing but the darkening forest. Panic started to rise within me, but I fought it down, telling myself it was just the wind. But the voice came again, louder this time, closer. "Leave now, before it's too late." I grabbed my rifle, the cold metal a comfort in my trembling hands. I scanned the trees, searching for any sign of movement, but there was nothing, just the trees, the shadows, and the growing sense of dread. The cabin felt smaller, the walls closing in, the symbols seeming to glow with a faint, sickly light. Suddenly, the door slammed shut, the sound reverberating through the small space. I spun around, my heart in my throat, but there was no one there. The room was empty, the only movement the flickering of the dying light through the cracked window. But the voice came again, this time inside the cabin, right behind me. "He's coming!" I whipped around, my rifle raised, but the room was still empty. My breath came in ragged gasps as I backed toward the door, my every instinct screaming at me to get out. But just as I reached for the handle, the air turned icy cold, and the light from the window dimmed, as if the sun itself was being snuffed out. The shadows in the room grew darker, thicker, until they were almost tangible. And then, from the deepest part of the shadows, a figure began to emerge. It was him, the old hunter. His form was twisted, his body gaunt and emaciated, his eyes burning with an unnatural light. His clothes were tattered, hanging off him like the remnants of a man long dead. But it was his face that filled me with terror. It was a mask of madness, twisted into a permanent snarl. His skin stretched tight over his skull, his eyes wide and unblinking. He stared at me, his gaze piercing through me, and I felt a cold dread settle in my bones. The air around him seemed to ripple, distorting the space, making it hard to focus on anything but his eyes, those terrible, glowing eyes. "You cannot leave," he hissed, his voice like the rustling of dead leaves. I stumbled back, trying to raise my rifle, but my arms felt heavy, as if they were no longer my own. The old hunter stepped closer, his movements jerky and unnatural, as if his body was being controlled by some unseen force. The symbols on the walls flared to life, glowing with a dark energy that seemed to pulse in time with my racing heart. I tried to run, but my legs wouldn't move. It was as if the very air had turned against me, holding me in place, forcing me to face the terror that was now just inches away. The old hunter reached out, his hand bony and clawed, and as he touched my chest, I felt a searing pain, like a brand being pressed into my flesh. I screamed, the sound echoing in the small cabin, but no one could hear me. The pain intensified, spreading through my body, burning me from the inside out. I could feel my mind slipping away, the darkness closing in, as the old hunter's voice whispered in my ear, "You are mine now." Everything went black. When I awoke, I was lying on the cold, hard ground outside the cabin. The sky was dark, the stars hidden behind thick clouds. My body ached, my skin burning where the old hunter had touched me. I struggled to my feet, my head spinning, trying to make sense of what had happened. But the cabin was gone, vanished as if it had never been there. I stumbled through the forest, the trees seeming to mock me with their twisted forms, their branches reaching out like the hands of the damned. The voice of the old hunter still echoed in my mind, a constant reminder that I was no longer alone. I could feel his presence lurking just out of sight, watching, waiting. I made it back to the village, but I was a changed man. The others could see it in my eyes, in the way I jumped at shadows, the way I avoided the mountains. They whispered among themselves, saying I had seen the old hunter, that I had been cursed like him, and they were right. The mark he left on me, the burning pain in my chest, it never went away. It grew, spreading through my body, twisting my thoughts, filling my dreams with nightmares. I could feel myself slipping, losing control, becoming something else, something monstrous. The forest called to me now, its voice no longer a whisper, but a roar, demanding my return. And I knew that one day I would have to go back, to take my place beside the old hunter, to become what he was. Because that's the curse, you see. The mountains don't let you go. Once you enter their domain, they claim you, twist you, and turn you into one of their own. And now, as I write this, I can hear the wind howling outside my window, calling my name, urging me to return to the place where it all began. The old hunter is waiting for me, and soon I will join him, forever lost to the madness of the mountains. The call of the wild had always been irresistible to me. As a hunter, the thrill of tracking elusive game through uncharted forests was the only life I knew. But when I heard about the dense, dark forest nestled deep in the mountains, untouched by man and teeming with creatures both known and unknown, I couldn't resist. I was warned. Everyone who knew of the forest spoke of its curse, its twisted paths, and the madness that befell those who ventured too deep. But I dismissed their warnings as nothing more than superstition, tales spun by the fearful and the weak. I was a hunter, and I feared nothing. The journey to the forest was long and arduous, but as I finally reached the outskirts, I was greeted by a silence so profound it felt unnatural. The trees were ancient, their trunks gnarled and twisted, their branches intertwining to form a canopy so thick that barely any sunlight could penetrate. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves, and the only sound was the occasional rustle of leaves in the breeze. I made camp at the edge of the forest, planning to start my hunt at dawn. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the forest into darkness, I felt a strange unease settle over me. The silence was oppressive, and as I sat by my campfire, the shadows cast by the flames seemed to move and shift, as if alive. I shook off the feeling, attributing it to the unfamiliar surroundings. But deep down I knew something was wrong. That night, I had the first of many nightmares. I dreamed of twisted, deformed creatures lurking in the shadows, their eyes glowing with a malevolent red light. They moved with unnatural speed, their limbs contorted in impossible angles, and their whispers echoed in my mind, filling me with a dread unlike anything I had ever felt before. I woke in a cold sweat, the fire reduced to embers, and the forest around me silent as the grave. Despite the unease that gnawed at the edges of my mind, I pressed on the next morning. The forest was dense, the underbrush thick and tangled, making progress slow and difficult. The further I ventured, the more disoriented I became. The trees seemed to close in around me, their branches forming an impenetrable wall that blocked out the sun. The air grew colder, and a thick fog began to roll in, obscuring my vision and making it impossible to see more than a few feet in front of me. Hours passed, and the sense of being watched grew stronger. I could feel eyes on me, hidden in the shadows, always just out of sight. The whispers began again, faint at first, but growing louder with each passing moment. They were unintelligible, a jumbled mix of sounds that seemed to come from all directions at once. I tried to ignore them, focusing on the task at hand, but they were relentless, burrowing into my mind and fraying my nerves. As night fell, I realized I was hopelessly lost. The forest was a labyrinth of twisted trees and overgrown paths, and no matter which direction I turned, I found myself back where I started. The fog had grown thicker, swallowing the light of my torch and leaving me in near total darkness. The whispers were louder now, more insistent, and I could feel the presence of something malevolent lurking just beyond the reach of my light. I knew I should have made camp and waited for daylight, but fear had taken hold of me, driving me deeper into the forest. The ground beneath my feet grew soft and spongy, the air thick with the scent of decay. The trees around me twisted into unnatural shapes, their bark peeling away to reveal a sickly, pulsating flesh beneath. The whispers had become a cacophony, drowning out all other sounds and filling my mind with terror. Then I saw it. A figure stood in the distance, barely visible through the fog. It was tall and gaunt, its limbs impossibly long and thin, its skin a sickly grey. Its eyes glowed with an unnatural red light, and its mouth was twisted into a grotesque grin. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest, as the figure slowly began to move toward me. I turned and ran, the sound of my own ragged breathing and pounding footsteps the only thing I could hear over the whispers. The fog seemed to close in around me, the trees reaching out with twisted limbs to grab at my clothes and skin. I stumbled and fell, the ground beneath me slick with mud and something else, something that smelled of blood and rot. When I looked up, the figure was gone, but the whispers remained, louder than ever. They were inside my head now, filling my mind with images of death and despair, of twisted, deformed creatures feasting on the flesh of the living. I could feel my sanity slipping away, my thoughts becoming fragmented and incoherent. I don't know how long I ran or where I was going. The forest had become a nightmare, a twisted reflection of reality where nothing made sense and everything was a threat. The trees were no longer just trees. They were living, breathing things, their bark pulsating with a sickly light, their branches reaching out like claws to tear at my flesh. I stumbled into a clearing, my legs giving out beneath me as I collapsed to the ground. The whispers had reached a fever pitch, the voices screaming in my ears, telling me to give in, to surrender to the madness. I could feel my grip on reality slipping away, the darkness closing in around me. But then, through the fog and the darkness, I saw a light. It was faint, barely more than a flicker, but it was enough to give me hope. I forced myself to my feet, my body screaming in protest, and stumbled toward the light. As I drew closer, I could see that it was coming from a small, dilapidated cabin, its windows glowing with a warm, inviting light. I didn't stop to think, didn't question how a cabin could exist in a place like this. I just needed to get away from the whispers, from the darkness that threatened to consume me. I reached the door and threw it open, collapsing inside. The warmth of the cabin enveloped me, driving away the cold and the fear. The whispers faded, replaced by the crackling of a fire in the hearth and the soft creak of the floorboards as I moved. I was safe, at least for the moment, but as I looked around, I realized that the cabin was not what it seemed. The walls were lined with shelves filled with strange, twisted objects. Bones, skulls, jars filled with dark, murky liquids. The air was thick with the scent of incense and something else, something metallic and coppery. The fire in the hearth cast flickering shadows on the walls, revealing strange symbols etched into the wood. I knew I had stumbled into something dark, something ancient and evil. But I was too exhausted, too terrified to care. I just wanted to rest, to escape the horrors of the forest, if only for a moment. I collapsed onto a worn, threadbare chair, my body sinking into the cushions. The warmth of the fire lulled me into a sense of security, and before I knew it, I was drifting off to sleep. But sleep offered no respite. The nightmares returned, more vivid and terrifying than before. I dreamed of the figure from the forest, its glowing red eyes and twisted grin, its long, thin limbs reaching out to drag me into the darkness. I dreamed of the whispers, louder and more insistent, telling me to give in, to surrender to the madness. I dreamed of the cabin itself, the walls closing in around me, the symbols glowing with a sickly light, the air thick with the scent of blood and decay. I woke with a start, my heart pounding in my chest, my body drenched in sweat. The fire had gone out, and the cabin was dark and cold. The whispers had returned, louder than ever, filling the room with their insidious murmurs. I knew I had to leave, had to get out of the cabin before it was too late. But as I stood to leave, I felt something cold and wet against my skin. I looked down and saw that my hands were covered in blood. I stumbled back, my breath catching in my throat as I looked around the cabin. The walls were stained with blood, the symbols glowing with a sickly red light. The air was thick with the scent of death, and the whispers had become a deafening roar, filling my mind with images of violence and I tried to leave, but the door wouldn't budge. The walls were closing in around me, the shadows twisting and writhing, the symbols glowing brighter and brighter. The whispers were screaming in my ears, telling me to give in, to surrender to the darkness. And then, the figure from the forest appeared in front of me. It was taller than I remembered, its limbs longer and thinner, its eyes glowing with a malevolent red light. Its grin was wider, more grotesque, its teeth sharp and jagged. It reached out with one long, thin limb, its fingers brushing against my skin, sending a jolt of terror through my body. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. The figure's touch was cold, icy cold, and I could feel it draining the life from my body. The whispers were louder than ever, a cacophony of voices filling my mind with terror and despair. The last thing I saw before the darkness took me was the figure's twisted grin, its red eyes glowing with a hunger that would never be sated. Spare. The mountain was known as a place of mystery and fear, a jagged peak that loomed over the small village of Valemont like a watchful sentinel. The villagers called it the Whispering Mountain, for the strange sounds that echoed through its valleys at night, whispers carried by the wind, voices that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. But for us, the hunters, it was simply a challenge, a wild place that promised untamed game and a chance to prove ourselves. There were 6 of us that day, seasoned hunters who had come together for one last hunt before winter set in. The mountain was steep and treacherous, but it was rumored to be home to some of the most elusive and dangerous creatures in the region. Our goal was simple: to track and bring down the legendary beast that was said to roam these woods, a creature known only in whispers and old folk tales. The villagers warned us not to go, their faces pale and eyes wide with fear as they spoke of the mountain's curse. They told stories of hunters who had gone up the mountain and never returned, of men driven mad by the voices in the wind, of bodies found mangled beyond recognition. But we dismissed their warnings as superstition, confident in our skills and eager for the thrill of the hunt. We set out at dawn, the air crisp and cold, our breath visible in the chill morning light. The mountain loomed ahead, its peaks shrouded in mist, the forest at its base dark and foreboding. The trees were ancient, their gnarled branches twisted into unnatural shapes, their trunks covered in moss and lichen. The ground was uneven, the underbrush thick and tangled, making progress slow and difficult. As we climbed higher, the atmosphere grew heavier, the air thick with the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves. The wind picked up, carrying with it the faint whispers that the villagers had spoken of. At first, they were barely audible, a soft murmur at the edge of our hearing, but as we moved deeper into the forest, they grew louder, more distinct. I could see the unease in my companions' faces, the way they glanced around nervously, their eyes wide with suspicion. The whispers seemed to come from all directions, surrounding us, echoing through the trees. They were unintelligible, a jumbled mix of sounds that sent shivers down my spine, but still we pressed on, determined to reach the summit and find our prey. By midday, we reached a small clearing where we decided to rest and eat. The sun was hidden behind a thick layer of clouds, casting a dull grey light over the landscape. The wind had died down, and the whispers had faded, leaving an eerie silence that seemed to press in on us from all sides. We ate in silence, our eyes scanning the trees for any sign of movement. The forest was still, the only sound the occasional rustle of leaves as a breeze stirred the branches. But there was something unsettling about the silence, something that made my skin crawl. It was as if the mountain itself was watching us, waiting. Then, without warning, the whispers returned, louder and more insistent than before. They seemed to come from the very earth beneath our feet, from the trees above us, from the air around us. They were still unintelligible, but there was a malevolence to them, a sense of something ancient and powerful, something that wanted us gone. We exchanged uneasy glances, our confidence beginning to waver. The whispers grew louder, more urgent, and I could see the fear in my companion's eyes. It was then that we heard it, a low, guttural growl that seemed to shake the very ground beneath us. It was a sound unlike anything I had ever heard before, deep and primal, filled with a rage that sent a jolt of fear through my heart. We sprang to our feet, our weapons at the ready, as the growl echoed through the forest. The whispers had stopped, replaced by an oppressive silence that hung heavy in the air. We could feel it now, the presence of something dark and malevolent, something that did not want us here. Then, from the shadows at the edge of the clearing, it emerged. The creature was enormous, its body covered in thick, matted fur, its eyes glowing with a malevolent red light. It moved with a terrifying grace, its massive form barely making a sound as it stepped into the clearing. Its claws were as long as hunting knives, its teeth bared in a snarl that sent a chill down my spine. But it was its eyes that terrified me the most, eyes filled with an intelligence and hatred that no animal should possess. For a moment, we were frozen in place, unable to move or even breathe as the creature stared us down. Then, with a deafening roar, it charged. The clearing erupted into chaos as we opened fire, the sound of gunshots echoing through the trees. The creature moved with blinding speed, dodging our bullets with an agility that defied its size. It was on us in seconds, its claws slicing through the air with deadly precision. I watched in horror as it tore through my companions one by one, their screams filling the air as the creature ripped them apart. I tried to help, tried to aim and fire, but my hands were shaking so badly that I could barely hold my rifle steady. The creature's roar filled my ears, drowning out the sound of my friends' dying screams. And then, it was over. The clearing was silent once more, the only sound the wind rustling through the trees. The creature was gone, vanished into the shadows as quickly as it had appeared. I stood there, my breath coming in ragged gasps, my heart pounding in my chest as I stared at the carnage around me. The bodies of my friends lay scattered across the clearing, their lifeless eyes staring up at the sky, their faces frozen in expressions of terror. Blood soaked the ground, the scent of death heavy in the air. I was the only one left, the only one who had survived. But as I stood there, alone and terrified, I knew that the creature was still out there, watching me from the shadows, waiting for its next move. The whispers had returned, louder and more insistent than before, filling my ears with their unintelligible words. I knew I had to get out of there, had to find a way down the mountain before the creature came back. But as I turned to leave, I felt something cold and wet against my neck. A droplet of water, or so I thought. But when I wiped it away, my hand came back stained with blood. I looked up, and there, hanging from the branches above me, were the bodies of my friends, their lifeless forms suspended like grotesque ornaments. Their eyes were wide open, their mouths twisted into silent screams. Blood dripped from their wounds, pooling on the ground beneath them. I felt my stomach turn, bile rising in my throat as I stumbled backward, my mind reeling with horror. This wasn't possible. I had seen their bodies on the ground just moments ago. How could they be hanging from the trees now? The whispers grew louder, more frenzied, as if mocking my confusion and fear. I could feel the ground shifting beneath me, the trees closing in, the darkness pressing down on me from all sides. The mountain itself seemed to be alive, its ancient, malevolent spirit intent on driving me mad. I ran. I don't remember much of what happened next, only the sound of my own ragged breathing, the pounding of my heart, the whispers that seemed to follow me wherever I went. The forest twisted around me, the trees warping and shifting as if trying to trap me within their grasp. No matter how fast I ran, the darkness seemed to be closing in on me, suffocating me with its weight. Finally, I stumbled into another clearing, my legs giving out beneath me as I fell to the ground. I was exhausted, my body battered and bruised, my mind teetering on the edge of madness. I could feel the creature's presence all around me, watching me from the shadows, waiting for the right moment to strike. But then, as I lay there, gasping for breath, I heard something else, a voice, clear and distinct, cutting through the whispers like a knife. It was a woman's voice, soft and soothing, but filled with an urgency that made my heart skip a beat. "Get up," she said. "You have to keep moving. It won't stop until it has you." I looked around, but there was no one there. The clearing was empty, the trees still and silent, but the voice persisted, urging me to get up, to keep moving, to find a way off the mountain before it was too late. I don't know where the strength came from, but somehow I managed to get to my feet. I stumbled forward, my legs trembling, my mind a haze of fear and confusion. The voice guided me, leading me through the twisting paths of the forest, away from the darkness, away from the whispers. But the creature wasn't done with me yet. I could hear it behind me, its growls growing louder, its footsteps echoing through the trees. It was coming for me, and I knew that if I stopped, if I slowed down even for a moment, it would catch me. I ran faster than I ever thought possible, my lungs burning, my legs screaming in pain. The voice continued to guide me, urging me on, telling me to stay strong, to keep moving, to fight the fear that threatened to consume me. But then, just as I thought I had a chance, the ground gave way beneath me. I fell, tumbling down a steep slope, my body bouncing and rolling over the rough terrain. When I finally came to a stop, I was disoriented and covered in cuts and bruises. My breath came in ragged gasps, and my vision swam as I tried to get my bearings. The creature's growls were still audible, echoing off the mountain walls. I could sense it growing closer, its presence like a dark cloud hanging over me. The whispers had returned, louder and more insistent than ever, filling the air with their mocking, incomprehensible voices. I forced myself to stand, my legs trembling beneath me. The voice, still clear and urgent, continued to guide me. It seemed to lead me towards a narrow cave entrance, partially obscured by rocks and vegetation. With no other options left, I stumbled towards it, driven by the hope that it might offer some shelter from the relentless beast. As I crawled into the cave, the growls grew fainter, but the whispers seemed to intensify, surrounding me with a cacophony of voices. The cave was dark and cold, the walls rough and damp. I pressed myself into a corner, trying to catch my breath and gather my strength. The voice in my mind was now softer, more insistent, urging me to stay hidden and to wait. I could feel the creature's presence just outside the cave, its growls and roars reverberating through the mountain. It was as if the very mountain itself was alive, its dark spirit entwined with the creature that hunted me. Time passed slowly, each moment stretching into an eternity as I huddled in the darkness. The whispers seemed to merge with the growls, creating a terrifying symphony of sound that gnawed at my sanity. My mind wandered back to my fallen companions, the horror of their deaths a constant reminder of what awaited me if I failed to escape. Then, without warning, the growls stopped. The silence that followed was almost worse than the noise, an oppressive stillness that seemed to press in on me from all sides. I could feel the weight of the mountain's dark presence, its ancient malevolence watching me, waiting. I waited for what felt like hours before the voice returned, guiding me once more. It urged me to leave the safety of the cave and to follow a narrow, winding path that seemed to descend further into the mountain. With a mixture of fear and determination, I ventured out of the cave, the darkness of the forest enveloping me once more. The path was treacherous, and every step was fraught with danger. I could still hear the whispers, though they were now more distant, fading as I moved away from the heart of the mountain's darkness. The growls had ceased entirely, but I knew that the creature could still be out there, lurking in the shadows, waiting for its chance to strike. Eventually, the path began to level out, and the forest grew less dense. The oppressive weight of the mountain seemed to lift, replaced by the faint light of dawn breaking through the trees. I stumbled out of the forest and onto a rocky ledge overlooking the valley below. Exhausted and battered, I collapsed on the ground, my body trembling uncontrollably. The village of Valemont lay below, bathed in the soft morning light. I had made it out, but the horrors of the mountain would forever be etched in my memory. The creature's presence lingered in my mind, a dark shadow that would never fully dissipate. The whispers and the growls were now just echoes of a nightmare that had become all too real. As I looked back at the mountain, I knew that it held secrets that were best left undisturbed, a place where darkness and fear intertwined in ways that defied understanding. I had survived the Whispering Mountain, but I knew that its dark spirit would forever haunt me, a reminder of the nightmarish encounter and the price of confronting the unknown. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting long skeletal shadows across the forest floor as the 5 seasoned hunters ventured into the wilderness. Their mission was not for sport or sustenance, but for vengeance. The death of their friend John, a respected veteran of the hunt, had ignited a fury in them. He had been killed by a creature unlike any they had ever encountered, something that defied their understanding and left them with a thirst for retribution. John's body had been found 3 days earlier, mutilated beyond recognition, the sight of his terrified expression haunting them all. The accounts of his death were inconsistent. Some claimed it was a bear, others spoke of a wolf, but the only certainty was that it was a predator of terrifying power and savagery. The hunters, led by the most experienced among them, decided they would track down this beast and exact justice. As they entered the forest, the air was thick with the earthy scent of damp leaves and rotting wood. The dense canopy above blocked out most of the light, casting the forest in a perpetual twilight. Their path was strewn with broken branches and torn foliage, evidence of the creature's trail. They followed it with a mix of determination and unease, their senses heightened, every rustle of leaves and snap of a twig making them jump. Nightfall brought a heavy fog that rolled in from the north, shrouding the forest in an almost palpable darkness. The temperature plummeted, and the once familiar woods now seemed foreign and menacing. The hunters set up camp in a small clearing, their fire casting flickering shadows that danced on the trees. The feeling of being watched was constant, a cold presence that lingered just beyond the edge of their campfire's glow. As the night deepened, the oppressive silence was broken by a low, guttural growl that seemed to emanate from the very heart of the forest. The hunters froze, their hearts pounding as they scanned the darkness. The growl grew louder, more menacing, and they braced themselves for the inevitable confrontation. The creature emerged from the fog, a massive, hulking form with matted fur and eyes that glowed with a fierce red intensity. It was unlike anything they had ever seen. Its body was an amalgamation of predator and nightmare, with claws as long as daggers and jaws lined with razor-sharp teeth. It moved with a speed and grace that defied its size, a predator born of pure malice. The hunters opened fire, their rifles cracking through the night. The bullets struck the creature, but it barely flinched, its skin seemingly impervious to their ammunition. The battle that ensued was a cacophony of terror and chaos. The creature struck with brutal efficiency, its claws slicing through flesh and bone, its roars mingling with the screams of the hunters. One by one, the hunters fell. Marcus was the first to go, his screams echoing through the forest as the creature tore him apart. Sarah and David fought valiantly but were overwhelmed, their bodies left mangled and broken. The final hunter, Richard, fought with a desperate ferocity, but even he could not withstand the creature's relentless assault. In the midst of the carnage, the creature's focus turned to the leader, James. As it loomed over the bodies of his fallen comrades, its eyes locked onto his with an unnerving, almost intelligent gaze. James, paralyzed with fear, felt an icy chill as the creature approached him. It was then that he saw something in those glowing red eyes, an emotion that seemed almost sad. Before James could react, the creature hesitated as if caught in a moment of introspection. Then, with a final mournful roar, it turned and disappeared into the fog, leaving James alone in the clearing. The oppressive silence returned, the air heavy with the weight of what had just transpired. James stumbled through the forest, his mind reeling from the events of the night. The bodies of his friends lay scattered in the clearing, their lifeless eyes staring up at him. He made his way back to the village, his body and soul drained, his mind fractured by the horrors he had witnessed. Upon his return, the villagers gathered around him, their faces a mix of fear and pity. They listened to his tale of the creature, but his description was so unbelievable, so filled with terror, that they struggled to comprehend it. The village mourned the loss of the hunters, but James's own ordeal was met with skepticism and disbelief. Days turned into weeks, and the trauma of the hunt began to consume James. His nights were plagued by vivid nightmares of the creature and the brutal deaths of his friends. Every sound in the darkness, every shadow on the wall seemed to bring with it the menace of the creature's presence. The villagers whispered about him, about how he had been marked by the beast. and they avoided him as though he carried a curse. One night, as James lay in bed, he heard the guttural growl once more, a sound that had become both familiar and horrifying. His heart raced as he sat up, gripping his rifle tightly, scanning the room for any sign of the creature. The darkness was absolute, the silence deafening. He ventured outside, drawn by the growl that seemed to be everywhere and nowhere all at once. The forest was a labyrinth of shadows, the fog rolling in once more, obscuring his vision. As he wandered through the trees, the growl grew louder, more insistent. The air was thick with a sense of impending doom. In a small clearing, James saw the creature once again. Its eyes glowed with a sinister light, and it seemed to be waiting for him. The creature's form was now even more grotesque, more otherworldly, and James could feel its eyes boring into his very soul. He raised his rifle, but the creature did not move. Instead, it watched him with an almost detached curiosity. James could feel his sanity slipping away, his mind unraveling under the weight of the creature's gaze. He knew that the creature had come back for him, that it had not forgotten or forgiven. He could feel a darkness creeping into his mind, a sense of inevitability that he could not escape. The next morning, the village found James's home abandoned. His belongings were left untouched, but there was no sign of him. The only clue was a set of deep claw marks on the ground, leading into the forest, disappearing into the mist. James was never seen again, and the village was left with the chilling realization that the creature had claimed him, just as it had claimed his friends. The forest remained silent, its shadows hiding secrets that are best left undisturbed. The legend of the shadow hunter lives on, a cautionary tale for those who dare to venture into the woods after dark. The darkness, it seems, is not just a part of the forest, but a part of something far more malevolent, a presence that waits, watches, and strikes with a vengeance. The dense forest lay shrouded in an oppressive fog, its silence broken only by the crunch of leaves beneath the feet of the four hunters as they made their way deeper into the wilderness. They were an experienced group, known for their prowess and skill, but tonight they faced something they had never encountered before. A predator that had been terrorizing the region, leaving a trail of fear and death in its wake. Their journey had begun with a sense of camaraderie and excitement, but as they delved further into the forest, unease began to settle over them. The predator they were hunting was rumored to be a creature of unspeakable terror, a beast that defied all logic and reason. Their search had started with the discovery of several mangled carcasses and eerie symbols carved into tree trunks, signs that something far beyond their understanding was at work. It was a cold evening when they set up camp, the chill in the air cutting through their clothes and sending shivers down their spines. The fire crackled and popped, casting flickering shadows that danced menacingly across the surrounding trees. The group, consisting of Alan, a grizzled veteran with a penchant for caution, Tom, an eager young hunter with a thirst for adventure, Sarah, a sharp-eyed tracker with a keen sense of intuition, and Mark, a skilled marksman with nerves of steel, gathered around the fire, their faces illuminated by its glow. As darkness fell, the forest seemed to come alive with unsettling sounds, the distant howl of a wolf, the rustling of unseen creatures in the underbrush, and the occasional snap of a twig. The hunters exchanged uneasy glances, each one feeling the weight of the unknown pressing down on them. They knew that the predator was near, and the forest had taken on a sinister quality, its shadows growing darker and more foreboding. The hours passed slowly, each minute stretching into an eternity as the tension mounted. Sarah, always the perceptive one, noticed an unusual stillness in the air. The forest seemed too quiet, the usual night sounds conspicuously absent. She voiced her concern to the group, but Alan dismissed it, attributing it to the natural quiet of the night. Tom, on the other hand, was eager to press on, convinced that they were on the verge of a breakthrough. Just as the fire began to die down, a chilling howl echoed through the forest, reverberating off the trees and sending a shiver down their spines. The hunters sprang to their feet, their weapons at the ready, as they scanned the darkness for any sign of movement. The howl was followed by a series of guttural growls, each one growing closer and more intense. Without warning, the predator emerged from the shadows, a monstrous figure with matted fur and glowing yellow eyes. Its massive frame was adorned with scars, and its teeth were like razors, gleaming in the firelight. The creature moved with a predatory grace, its every step calculated and deliberate. The hunters were taken aback by the sheer size and ferocity of the beast, but they quickly rallied, their instincts taking over as they prepared to face their foe. The battle was brutal and chaotic. The predator lunged with a speed and strength that defied belief, its claws slashing through the air and its jaws snapping with terrifying force. Alan fired his rifle, but the bullets seemed to have little effect on the creature. Tom attempted to distract the beast, but his efforts were in vain as the predator struck him down with a single swipe of its claw. Sarah and Mark fought valiantly, their shots finding their mark, but the creature was relentless, its aggression unyielding. The fight raged on, the clearing a maelstrom of violence and terror. The forest seemed to close in around them, the darkness swallowing their screams and the fog obscuring their vision. The predator was a whirlwind of fury, its eyes glowing with a malevolent intelligence as it picked off the hunters one by one. The sounds of the battle were deafening, gunfire, roars, and the agonized cries of the fallen. In the midst of the chaos, Sarah found herself separated from the others. She stumbled through the forest, her breath coming in ragged gasps as she tried to regain her bearings. The fog was thicker now, and the darkness seemed to press in on her from all sides. She could hear the creature's growls growing fainter, but she knew that it was only a matter of time before it found her. Desperate to escape, Sarah pushed through the underbrush, her heart pounding with fear. She came across a small, abandoned cabin, its rotting timbers and broken windows offering a glimmer of hope. She hurried inside, her flashlight cutting through the darkness as she searched for a way to barricade the door. The cabin was filled with strange, unsettling artifacts, shadows on the walls that seemed to move, and symbols carved into the wooden floor. Sarah's unease grew as she realized that the cabin was not just abandoned, but had been used for something sinister. Her instincts told her that she was not alone, that the creature was still hunting her, waiting for the right moment to strike. As she secured the door and tried to calm her racing heart, Sarah noticed something in the corner of the room, a journal, its pages yellowed with age. She picked it up and began to read, her eyes widening with horror as she discovered that the cabin had once belonged to a hunter who had disappeared under similar circumstances. The journal spoke of a creature that was not just a beast, but a malevolent force, an entity that thrived on fear and despair. The more Sarah read, the more she realized that the creature they were hunting was not just an animal, but a manifestation of something far darker, a being that preyed on the souls of those who ventured into its domain. The journal detailed rituals and symbols meant to ward off the creature, but it was clear that they were only effective if the hunter understood the nature of the beast. The cabin seemed to close in around Sarah as she read, the shadows on the walls growing more distinct and menacing. She could hear the growl of the predator outside, its presence growing ever closer. The realization dawned on her that the creature was not just hunting them, but had been waiting for them, luring them into its trap. With trembling hands, Sarah began to follow the instructions in the journal, using the symbols and rituals to protect herself. She knew that it was a desperate measure, but it was her only chance. As she completed the final ritual, the growling outside ceased, and an eerie silence enveloped the cabin. Sarah waited in the darkness, her breath slow and measured as she listened for any sign of the creature. Hours passed, and the silence remained unbroken. She knew that the predator had been thwarted for now, but the fear remained, a gnawing presence that would not leave her. When dawn finally arrived, Sarah emerged from the cabin, her body and mind exhausted. The forest was eerily quiet, the fog lifting to reveal a landscape scarred by the events of the previous night. She made her way back to the village, her heart heavy with the knowledge that her friends were gone, their fates sealed by the malevolent force they had sought to confront. The village welcomed her with a mixture of relief and sorrow, the survivors of the hunt now mere shadows of their former selves. Sarah's account of the night's events was met with disbelief and fear, the villagers unable to grasp the full extent of the horror she had witnessed. They spoke in hushed tones of the creature, of the darkness that had claimed their friends, and of the haunted forest that lay beyond. Sarah's life would never be the same. The nightmares of that night plagued her, the image of the creature's glowing eyes and the sounds of her friends' screams echoing in her mind. She could never escape the darkness that had touched her soul, the shadow of the hunter that had left its mark on her. The forest remained a place of dread, its secrets hidden in the mists and shadows. The legend of the vanishing hunters lived on, a chilling reminder of the malevolent force that lurked in the darkness, waiting for those who dared to enter its domain. The forest was no longer just a place of trees and animals, but a realm of fear and despair, where the line between the living and the dead was perilously thin.